Hey, Matthias, good morning.
Hi Reed, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How's your evening going?
Um, well, definitely something I've been looking forward to now. It's the very end of my week in London, but super excited to be on your live stream.
Yeah, I'm glad you came on. I was just looking at some of the history of Power BI tools, and I and I know your website has a tweet from James Bartlett, who's also in the chat at the moment. So I thought that's a funny set of circumstances.
Yeah, uh, uh, he's when we when the tool went open source first, which was in October last year.
Hmm.
He was one of the first people to jump on it, even though we've never actually met. So we only know each other quite virtually.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same with me. Like the 30, 40 plus people now at this point that I've done streams with and everything, where I only know what they look like from like the chest up. You realize like with COVID technology, it's like you've met a lot of people at this point in tech careers, and you have no idea if they're like a shorts kind of person or are they a pants
Mhm.
person.
I had some interesting feedback recently when I met someone in my office for the first time since lockdown, and her immediate and we had only ever been on Zoom together prior to that, and her first um, comment was, "You look quite different in person." um, I didn't know how to take that, but I
He's
guess
like, yeah,
just
the camera adds 10 pounds, and
yeah.
just that's
Well,
really
COVID
funny.
has certainly added some pounds for me as well.
Yeah, for sure. But overall, like I know we've had communication on and off on like our little community Slack channel that we've had. I appreciate you jumping on and wanting to do this today. Uh, I'm honestly excited because I've heard of your tools since it went open source and everything back in the fall, but I haven't had a chance to really dive into it yet. But if the fact that James gives it a big thumbs up, and a few others, like I'm actually excited to be hanging out with the Ions today and watching it and being able to just learn a lot more about its uses for DevOps and deployment and all that. So
Hmm.
I know you've been in the space. It seems like for quite a while now. At least from my little bit of LinkedIn snooping, you've been at the last organization for like 14 years now. Is that correct?
That's very true, which I
Yeah,
think is quite unusual nowadays.
yeah, for sure.
However, I've been very lucky in the sense that I've actually gone through a series of super interesting roles at the same company, um, and so it's almost felt like I've had various job changes, even though I didn't change employer, and it's always been exciting and challenging and something enjoyable.
And I think certainly the like you said, it's definitely atypical to use for most people like be at a company probably more than about 3 to 5 years before hopping ship. So the dedication is very cool. But for the people tuning in, besides the tool that we're going to show today, do you want to give a little quick summary of like the background about yourself, who you are, and everything?
Sure. Absolutely. If you want to switch screens, because I've got a few things.
Absolutely.
There we go.
Done.
Fantastic. Um, so yeah, I'm currently head of finance systems at YouGov in London. Um, uh, my background is basically entirely on Microsoft technologies. I counted up recently, so it's 17 plus years right now. Um, Started off very deep in technology as a .NET developer, architect, and around 2015, I moved into business intelligence. Landed on Tabular, and then a year later on Power BI. So pretty much been on Power BI almost since it became public.
The designer
Um,
phase.
yes, and that's been my great passion ever since. And obviously, we're talking about PBI-Tools today. That started not too long after I discovered Power BI. Pretty much goes back to 2017. Although, as I said, the public only actually heard about it a few months ago. So there's actually a lot of history in it, and hopefully I can shed some light on that and also explain what the motivation was for the tool.
Absolutely. I think with some of the best tools, like Power BI side tools is another great example with Didier, who's tuned in there. Like, I just wanted to make a tool that solved a lot of pain points that I had when developing, and I just happened to find out that other people like to use this too.
Indeed. That's pretty much where I'm coming from.
Yeah,
I'm going to move on here, if you don't mind.
sure.
There we go. Just giving people an idea of what I've got in mind. So really, two key objectives here. First of all, make PBI-Tools known to more people, and as I said, explain what it is and where it's come from. And then the second thing is, I want to talk about deployments. So that's the most recent big addition to PBI-Tools, using it as a CI/CD tool. And that's actually what the last few months of my at least of my PBI-Tools life, if you will, have gone into. I've got a bunch of exciting demos here, and I'm super excited about the fact that you, Reed, actually haven't used the tool yourself. So my challenge is basically to convince you that that's a cool thing.
Excellent.
If you don't mind me just diving right in there.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to describe why PBI-Tools, it's highlighted right at the top here. The purpose for me was to move away from dealing with those PBIX files, which are black boxes, single files, and actually get into a position where we have a development project where we can do source control and collaboration, where we can automate things and ultimately actually get into CI/CD. And I mentioned deployment functionality is something which has come into PBI-Tools recently. This is basically where the circle closes. So this is really sort of reaching that vision now. And I guess from that point of view, it's also a good reason to go public. So the key idea in PBI-Tools is what I call the PBIX proj folder format. So I basically, if you will, invented a format which splits what's in a PBIX file into a folder structure and into various files in such a way that you take a file, extract it into a folder, which then goes into source control. And you can also go backwards. You can take what's in source control and bring it back into a fully working PBIX or PBIT file, and then deploy that, for instance, or collaborate on. That works for thin reports and models, although I have to say I'm mostly focusing on providing tooling around reports, and thin reports in particular, just because tabular editors out there and absolutely hugely excellent in terms of supporting people with modeling. There's absolutely no point, trying to do something as an alternative to it. However, as far as reports are concerned, there is a huge gap. There's virtually nothing out there, from what I can tell, allowing people to do source control, automation, CI/CD. So that's really where I want to come in here. Currently, it's a command line tool, which I appreciate might be a bit of a problem in terms of adoption. I'm very much aware that having some sort of GUI, would be a big deal. I've actually started in the background setting up what a GUI might look like and how it might fit into the architecture. But so far, it was all about features from my point of view, as opposed to usability.
Yeah. I would imagine too with either Darren or Daniel, they're probably like great resources to ping, because they built, I forget specifically what it's built off of, but I know Deck Studio and Tabular Editor are both built off of different platforms, and they have their different like pros and cons as far as like a UI connecting to a feature goes.
So I mean, also, speaking to the community here, if anyone felt inclined, and wanted to collaborate on the technical side here, GUI and providing a UI for this would definitely be something I'd hugely appreciate. And so deployments mentioned a few times now. Basically, deployments are manifest driven. So rather than sort of writing a script with commands, you basically define what your deployment is meant to do. It's almost like data as opposed to actions, which also means you can keep that in source control, just like everything else. And deployments work with PBIX files or with PBIX proj folders. And that's quite important also, and I'll explain later. And you can implement really, really simple workflows, and I've got one demo for that, but you can also go very far and have some complex stuff. I've got one more slide, and then I've actually got a demo. Because obviously I want to show stuff. I created this one recently just to provide a visual in terms of, you know, what's the vision for PBITools and how does it all fit together. So basically, developers obviously start off with PBIX files and use tools like Power BI Desktop, Tabular Editor, DAX Studio. So this is the starting point. This is the develop part of it, and this is where PBITools comes in, because you then extract, as I said before, your PBIX file, and you end up in source control, which is the middle bit here. You've got your folder structure, and now you can actually integrate with things like VS Code, GitHub, Azure repos, and GitLab. You can work with different approval workflows. You can review changes before approving them. You can work with branching models. So everything that engineers are used to is possible now with Power BI projects, and including, and this is the third pillar, deployment. Once I've got those sources in a central source control system, PBITools can come in and actually recompile back into PBIX file and then actually send it off into Power BI service. Why don't I give you a demo which literally shows all of those bits in one go, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, in general,
Cool.
I'm a huge visual learner, so it's really nice to be able to just get this kind of laid out in as far as like a flowchart and a pipeline.
Cool. So I'm gonna walk you through here, and this will literally show starting off in Power BI Desktop, extracting it into a folder structure, committing it into source control, having it deployed into Power BI, and then also moving it between different environments. This is a very simple report. I stole it from SQL BI. It's one of their samples they're providing. Basically, Contoso model with calculation groups on top. Doesn't really matter. So this is my report. Let me maximize it. And I'm just going to do a very silly change here, but one which is very visual. I'm just going to change the background color and make it blue, like so. Here we go. So if I now close and save my file and switch over here. So this is VS Code. This is where I've already got a project with that particular report in it. If I open a new terminal here, as I said before, currently that's just a command line tool. I can basically run PBITools, and specifically I can run PBITools extract, and then reference report one, which is the one I've just changed. So here we go. PBITools extract, and report one.pbix is the file, and there we go. That's extract, super fast. And I can see now VS Code obviously has source control integrated. The color changed, indicating that we've got some modifications. In fact, we have 3 files changed. So let's see if we can make sense of that. If I look into this one, arguably, you know, there's a lot of JSON going on here. But since we know what I did, we can actually interpret that very nicely. We can see my sales by month page, which is basically the folder name here, had a config change where the background was set to 3.0, which well, sorry, where the color was changed to color ID 2 with a transparency of 30. So that's 30% transparency, right? And then this is the color referencing the color in my theme. The change we've got here is just the landing page. The active section was changed back to the first one. And then this one is just a metadata file, which basically shows me a timestamp of when I last made a change here. So I'm going to commit all of that. I'm going to say changed background color on first page. Here we go. I'm currently on the dev branch, which is important. We're going to see that in a second. And so I'm now pushing this, which actually goes into Azure DevOps. So I'm going to switch over here, where my file will now land. I'm in single workspace, and it says you just updated the dev branch. It knows that. Now, one thing I've already set up is a pipeline, and you can see single workspace, which is the repo we're currently in, is currently running a pipeline. When I click on that, I can see it's performing various activities. The one I'm interested in is PBI-Tools deploy. So that one will basically take the changes I've just committed. It will recompile it into a pbix file. We can see that's currently happening. And that's already done. So if I now go and actually go, conveniently, it gives you a hyperlink right in here. So I can literally click on this, which will basically open this report for me. There we go. So this is my report in Power BI in a dev workspace. That's why I pointed out the branch earlier. And I've got my blue background color. If I go into the staging workspace, and go to report 1, I can see I don't, well, and if I switch here, I don't have my change there because I haven't actually moved it into this environment yet. So this is deploying into one environment. If I then go here and say, let me create a pull request. So this is basically where process comes in. And let me say, I want to advance this change into a release branch. I'm just going to change that. There we go. And obviously, I'm gonna complete this myself now. You know, in the real world, that would someone else would click this button. So this is that. And what's now happening? If I go back into my pipelines, and if I click on environment, I can see that now my UAT environment actually has a pipeline running. Dev is fine, that's already done. Prod, we haven't touched so far. And in UAT, I now have a deployment running, which is effectively bringing that same change into my UAT workspace, which we'll see in a second. So exactly the same is going on now. The only difference is that because we started off from a branch that's effectively linked to a different environment, the destination is now a different workspace. So here we go. If I click on this again, report one, it's opened here. Blue background is there, and here I've got my staging workspace instead of the dev workspace.
Fantastic.
And to take things even further, if I now go back into VS Code, here we go. So I'm back in my dev branch, right? Let's have a little look what's going on here. So you remember I worked on this PBIX file earlier, which was the one I was editing in Power BI Desktop. But you can also see it's actually grayed out. So I've got an ignore file here, which says ignore all PBIX files. They never end up in source control. They never end up in Azure DevOps. Only those files end up there. So let me do something different now. Let me actually go wild and make a change directly in source code, if you will. We've already seen this one earlier, active section index. So I can't surprise you now because I've already mentioned what it does. But you can see, let me just change that arbitrarily to 2. Here we go. So I've got one change now, and I'm going to call this changed landing page. And when we push that up, it will, because I'm still on my dev branch locally, right? It will basically deploy into the dev environment. And there we go. That's actually happening. I've got my change landing page. We can see there's a job running. And this is something we've seen twice before now. So basically once that's done, and I go to the report link, it will actually get me to the 3rd page by default, as opposed to the first or second one. So let's just give it a second. It's actually very nicely fast today. Really, Azure DevOps always depends on the time of day. So I think because this is the end of the week over here now, I'm actually quite lucky for those demos. There we go. Look at this. So I've now gone to the well, if I take this off here, right? So this is literally just a report grid. You can see that this is now giving me the 3rd page. And then the final thing, to just really round it up, obviously, if I now want to go back as a developer and actually continue on the report with further changes, but in Power BI Desktop, I've got a problem, right? Because I've just made a change directly in this JSON file. This report 1.pbix hasn't changed. That's actually still the earlier version I tried. So I can sort that out quite easily. And this is basically what different developers would do. So let's say I'd be someone else now who'd take over on this particular report. I'd obviously have to get my local working copy in sync with whatever is in source control. So I can use PBI-Tools compile. Just one really important thing for everyone to know, the tool, whilst it's command line and hence isn't very graphical, sorry, let me just is actually self-documenting. So once you know which particular action you want to go for, and I personally do this all the time, even though obviously I've spent years with that tool, If you don't know exactly what you need to provide, just type the action with nothing else, and it will basically tell you what it needs, right? And
Okay.
so what do I want to do? I want to compile, and I need to provide a folder reference, which basically has the sources for my report. So in this case, it would be reports, and then report 1 is the folder. There we go. This is going to fail now.
And once you have a sec too, I do have a quick question from somebody in the chat. It's related to compiling. So Daryl Lynch wants to know, is the compile decompile suitable for import data models, or is this mainly for report PBIX?
That's absolutely suitable for data models, and I do that extensively. With one caveat, the compile, so going back, only works for PBIT files. So basically, if you've got a data model as well, you can compile not into PBIX, but into PBIT. You then open it up in Power BI Desktop and just click refresh, and then you're back on a normal PBIX file. I thought it was going to fail, but it hasn't actually. That's only because I thought it would complain about having to overwrite the file, but as you can see, it's created it in my current working folder. So if I open this one, Power BI Desktop, we'll then see not just in my pipeline in Azure DevOps, but even on my local machine, I now get a fully working file. Power BI Desktop is always a bit slow to start. So here we go. So if I now do browse reports, and that would be this one created just now, we'll now see it's got both the blue background on page 1, and it has the page 3 as my landing page. There we go. So this is literally full circle, right? Extracting the file, committing it, having it recompiled on the server and deployed, promoting it to different environments using a branching model, bringing it back down on a different developer's machine, recompiling it there, and continuing to work with Power BI Desktop. And that is basically what I want to get across in terms of use and functionality. I've got quite a few more demos, and
yes, please.
I'm more than happy to talk about the deployment bit in particular. But you tell me what you'd like to see and go more into.
I think some more examples of deployment or any other demos that you have would be fantastic. Like just some comments on this as well. I think one, this is certainly as you've mentioned, you've put all the effort into features for now. The next push I'm guessing for the evolution of this is going to be making it easier to use and more of the front end aspect. But it really, like, this is the first time, and I've seen it in the comments, like there's a true Azure or a good DevOps integration that can really let you do that. And I know there's also some ways to do it as well with Tabular Editor, but I think this is fantastic, and it kind of scratches a lot of backs. Like I think this in this case, there's probably many opportunities for you potentially, certainly, to do configurations and setup for the clients to get this basically running and automated. Microsoft's probably happy because it's an additional encouragement for people to use Azure DevOps, which they love absolutely. So I think it works out. There's a huge value add for clients. It's certainly I think just good for you. It seems to be good for you. And then anything that like this usually just makes Microsoft really happy. Like, yes, that's an excuse for people to use more of our tools, but for really good reason. Like I think I have at least 3 or 4 clients, and honestly, like I have a few of them that I'm probably going to email at the end of the day today. I'm going to link them to this live stream. Like, hey, by the way, I know you've asked me a couple times, can you do DevOps in Power BI? Kind of, sort of. But this is one of those, like, actually, yeah, you kind of can now. If it's a bit of a setup process, but if you really need DevOps type experience with multiple developers, this would be hugely beneficial. So I'm gonna be sharing this for a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, when I talked about my bio earlier, obviously I'm in an enterprise context, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm running a sizable data management team now. So those are that's sort of the background where I've seen problems which needed solutions, right? So this is not targeting a sole developer who occasionally make some updates to a report.
Of course.
This is really how can I make Power BI work in a substantial team with ambitions to actually use good processes and the latest technologies around deployments and ultimately quality control, right?
I agree.
Um, so just to I absolutely understand that that doesn't necessarily reach everyone. You did mention there is a bit of a setup cost.
Yep.
Absolutely. But you're always going to have that, when
Of
you're
course.
actually in a bigger team.
Yeah, I mean, and,
um,
it's with anything. You need a database set up for the most part. You don't just snap your fingers. You need like
exactly.
with any of these. And I will imagine the complexity with setup and configuration will, as the product evolves, will reduce. But like
Hmm.
clearly, there's a huge ROI. I have a couple of questions
Hmm.
that I want to pass on before we flip into some
Yeah,
other
okay.
demos because this is a good spot.
Yeah.
So Steven had a question on. Yeah, his company will want to investigate how much this tool is secure for us before we use it. Is there someone to reach out to? I would assume you.
Well, it's open source and not commercial, right?
Yep.
Uh, uh, with the log4j problem that happened recently, there was a lot of talk in the open source community when uh, companies suddenly made demands of open source developers, and lots of people said that that doesn't quite go together. It's the same here, right? So we can definitely have a chart, but that's as far as it can go, as long as there is no commercial backing here, which is definitely not something I've got in mind right now.
Mm,
However, the very fact that this is completely open source, literally every single piece of code that goes
yeah.
into it is available in GitHub. Um, it's fully transparent, right?
Yep. Perfect. I think he did. He had just one quick follow-up question, and then I'll pass off a few others. So
Okay.
he's just wondering, is there, and this kind of relates to two different questions. Um, is there any kind of like more detailed tutorial out besides like kind of what we're
Uh-huh.
doing right now that
Right.
that's kind of a good thorough walkthrough of the tool?
Yes. Um, Not currently, but this is number one of my priorities right now. So
Perfect. Yep.
when we get to roadmap later, you're going to see I want to invest quite a bit in documentation.
Excellent. Let's see. I'll do two more, and then I think we can maybe flip
Sure.
potentially do some demos. But uh, Wooter, if I'm saying the name right, how would you fit this into the table editor capabilities and also the Power BI service deployment capabilities? And I'll agree
Uh-huh.
that there's a bit of fragmentation in the space of different tools, like and then what tools should be used for what, and which
Right.
is best at
Okay.
doing that.
Very good question, and this is obviously something I've considered massively. Because uh, uh, I mean, whilst I'm obviously excited from a pure technical point of view about this, at the end of the day, I'm running a team, and I've got certain business objectives, right? Um, so tabular editor works with models and with models only, right? And it's
Mhm.
absolutely it's the best tool out there when it comes to model development. No argument about that, right? Uh, but there is more in Power BI, which is basically reports, the whole aspect of pages and visuals, and ultimately what's actually user facing. Um, uh, Tabular Editor doesn't do anything around that, and as far as I can tell, there is no other tooling around, right? So when you do report development, um, uh, this is really where I want to fill the gap here. As far as Power BI service deployment capabilities, you're probably thinking about a premium deployment pipelines here. They clearly aim to address the deployment bit, and particularly with supporting multiple environments. They are doing the right thing here. The key problem, from my point of view, is that you're still dealing with Power BI artifacts as a black box, right? You're still dealing with files. You're still dealing with files which don't actually have a change control story. And most importantly, you can't, you can never know whether what's currently in a given workspace is what I happen to have on my local machine, right? So this version problem, both in terms of what's the latest and also what's changed between version 1 and version 2, is not addressed. And that's precisely where this tool is coming in. As we've seen earlier, when there's a change, you literally see down to the byte, if you will, what's changed, right? You can see that the transparency number was changed, or the background color. Power BI service doesn't provide anything like that. And also with this, you effectively establish your source control system as the only source of truth, which means if you ever want to know what happens, what's going on in my workspace, you know that it will have come from a particular branch in my repo, and there can never be a discrepancy between those, right? So those are the two things which I really care about, and Power BI deployment pipelines just don't address those concerns.
Exactly, like, and that, with a lot of their other features, like it services a certain number of enterprise functionality, like goals as well. It's not super feature rich, but it's designed to be, if you want, like, the clicky, draggy, droppy, stuff, as Christian Wade likes to say. It's easy and quick to set up. It gives you just enough features to, like, get you excited. But then if you actually want, if somebody's really doing enterprise level goals, that's typically done with statisticians and stuff, or other things in Azure with a lot more complexities besides just, if this value passes this, I want a notification to these 5 people type of a thing. And same with deployment pipelines. Great to get started and easy to set up, but this is a much more robust system that covers a lot of other stuff, all the way down to the font sizes and colors and everything else that goes to anything related to the metadata contained in the files. I did have one. I have one request of somebody at least to do. So far, that's the only one, so that might help steer us of what we want to continue to demo. Lewis wanted to see if we could dive a bit more into, like, the steps of building the pipeline.
Yes.
Yes. So perfect.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'd be keen to do. Okay. All right. If you don't mind just switching back to the slides.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. So we've looked at that, and I've basically shown what this picture tells us in action. So just a couple of things explained. So I mentioned earlier, deployments are declarative. There's a manifest. Like most things in Power BI, it's JSON. That's sort of what Microsoft's landed on. And so this is an example of what a manifest looks like. So I'm basically saying this is a report deployment. The source for it is a folder at this particular path. I'm authenticating with the service principal. And then I've got 3 environments set up where each environment, in this case, is linked to a particular workspace ID, right? So this is one example, just so everyone's seen them. And then this is the other thing. And I just wanted to explain that a little bit, because the extraction of a pbix file into a folder structure, in a way that was really kind of the turning point that made this entire tooling chain possible, right? Most people on the call will probably be familiar with the fact that pbix files are actually zip files. So if you basically just append .zip to the file name, you can open it up, and this is what a file would generally look like. There's a lot of there are lots of parts in here, but they don't have, apart from this one, they don't have any extensions. It's not quite clear what kind of data actually sits in here. When we then move over here, this is what this exact same file actually looks like as a PBIX proj. So we can see there is a bit more of a folder structure, and all the files now have extensions which indicate what sort of data type is in there. When we expand that a bit further, and this is over here, the third one, we can see that there's actually a very logical structure in place, at least I hope so. So for instance, my model gives me all my enquiries as separate files, which I can just open and inspect like any other text file. I've got all my tables in here, and my report does something quite similar, where each page, Power BI calls those sections, is expanded into a subfolder where the title is actually part of the folder name, and so on and so forth. So the design goal here was everything we're putting into this folder structure should be human readable. It needs to be reversible so that we can actually recompile. And also thinking about collaboration, the risk of merge conflicts should be minimal. You generally achieve that by having many small files as opposed to few big files. And so the only thing that's been added is this particular pbix proj.json file, which contains some metadata, and is, for anyone who's a developer here, is sort of equivalent to a CS proj file in a C# development project, for instance. So just moving on. Yeah, so here I have spelled out what I would call an environment matrix. So before setting up a CI/CD pipeline, I would suggest that you think about, well, what should your environments look like? What does the branching model look like? And the demo we've seen earlier is basically explained here. I've got 3 environments, which is quite standard. I have particular Git branches mapped into those environments, here even with a wildcard. We've also seen that my report sources were in the reports, in a subfolder underneath reports. So the deployment manifest in this case would say the source is of type folder and the path forward is in reports /star. So we're using wildcards here. My definitions for those environments would be dev is basically what developers interact with. That's also why we've seen that I basically just had the dev branch open on my laptop. All the other branches have some sort of control around them and are generally populated using pull requests and using certain people who have those permissions. And so generally not developers themselves. So as an example, your release manager or your technical architect could have authority to advance things into a UAT or staging workspace, and your delivery manager or product owner ultimately could have permissions to move things into production. We've also seen how I've mapped Power BI workspaces into the different environments. So that's one pattern. There are others possible as well. And if you want to see, and I'd be very happy to share those slides afterwards, if you actually want to see the sources for that project, as well as the definition for the pipelines. This is in a public Azure DevOps project, so available for everyone, actually. Now, switching back to VS Code. So this is that exact same project we were just talking about. So let me just explain how it works, since that question came up earlier. I already mentioned a convention is that we're using pbix.proj.json as a standard metadata file. That happens to contain my deployment manifest here. So it's in the root of my repository. In this particular case, I've got one deployment definition, which I given the name of folders. It's an arbitrary name, just something we can use to refer to it. And if I just collapse here, we can see there's a description. I'm saying this is a report deployment as opposed to a model, for instance. I'm saying the sources are in folders as opposed to files, and the folders are to be found underneath reports. So basically report 1 and report 2. We're authenticating with a service principal. The secret is accessed using an environment variable. Obviously, I wouldn't put that into source control. That's something I only define in Azure DevOps directly. Looking at my environments, it's very straightforward. Basically, those 3 environments are defined. They map to Azure DevOps environments. And instead of actually putting the workspace GUID here, I've got the workspace name. So it's even more convenient because that means something to people. So that's what defines the deployment. And because you mentioned Azure DevOps earlier, it's really important for everyone to understand. I happen to use Azure DevOps for this demo. However, this tool is completely agnostic, right? So
there's actually a question perfectly on that, which is the, can this be set up in GitHub instead of Azure?
Absolutely. So, I mean, all of those hosted CI/CD solutions are quite similar. They somehow landed on using YAML files to define pipelines. So this happens to be an Azure DevOps YAML file, but there's nothing preventing me from putting a GitHub YAML file in here, or one for GitLab, or any other tool that you want to work with, right? What I generally like to do when it comes to CI/CD, I personally always try to keep as much to keep the CI/CD pipeline as thin, if you will, as possible. So put as little logic in here as I can possibly do, so that I can actually test out my deployment process locally, for instance. I'm going to show that in a second. So if we're looking at this, it's very straightforward. And again, converting that to GitHub, for instance, would be quite trivial. We've got branch triggers, which is why I started off with my environment matrix earlier. So you're actually clear on which branches you want to work with. Then I've got some variables here. And those help me to actually map branch names or branch patterns into environment names. So that's that. This is setup. And then I've got my jobs here. So I'm specifying that this is a deployment job. So that's a particular type of job in Azure DevOps. I've got docs here as well. I can specify which environment does this go into, which then works very well because, let me just remind us, if we go back here, in Azure DevOps, I actually have this dedicated environments view, right? So which allows me to actually see for each environment, what was the last job that ran, what was the status, or if I click on the environment, I actually get the full history with all the jobs I've had here, right? So this is precisely, oops, sorry, wrong window. This is precisely what's going on here. And then down here, I've got a couple of steps. And to be honest with you, actually only this one is relevant. The others, well, I mean, this is the checkout step. So this is so the deployment job has the job, has the sources. But those two are actually just for debugging. Only this one is the one that does the job. And so we can see pbitools.core, we're running the deploy action. This is a folder reference, which basically tells us where to find the manifest. This is the profile reference, which in this particular case has the name of folders. And then the environment, which we've already used to refer to the Azure DevOps environment, is used here as well. So I want to make sure that in my setup, I'm actually using the exact same names. And that's it. That's pretty much how everything works together. So let me show you how that works locally, because for me, I've worked with CI/CD pipelines long before I actually got into Power BI, so I've got quite some history with that, and I've got some opinions here as well. I don't want to have a CI/CD pipeline as a black box. I want to be able to debug and test as much of that as I possibly can on my own machine. So I'm in the same folder here. I've got PBI-Tools accessible. In this particular case, I'm going to use PBI-Tools.core, which is actually a trimmed down version of PBI-Tools, which is cross-platform, and so that is meant to be used on a CI/CD server, where, for instance, you can't assume that Power BI Desktop is installed, right? So this is a version that has fewer features, but it has very few dependencies. If I basically run what I would normally run in Azure, like so, I think I didn't copy. Sorry. There we go. If I do this, and then basically fill in folders, and the environment would be, let's say, dev, like so. I can put what if here, and it will basically simulate the deployment process. Specifically, it will actually give me lots of very useful diagnostic output. So for instance, it will resolve all reports which my source path matches. So in this case, those two. It will test my authentication. So it actually tries to acquire an access token from the login endpoint, making sure my service principal is correct. And it will also give me some metadata, so I can actually see, did I specify my environment reference correctly? Did I specify my workspace correctly and all of that? If I do the same thing again without what if at the end, given that it does have valid credentials, there we go. It's now doing exactly the same thing it did earlier, only in this case actually from my local sources. Again, that's something I personally care about, because debugging a complex setup in a CI/CD server only is very painful, and I always try to avoid it. Not sure if that sort of confused things more, or whether that was helpful in terms of showing the ins and outs a bit more.
I think so far from what I've seen, people are absorbing most of it and just very, very impressed by the the level of configuration that this has. I do have a couple of questions that I can pop up. Yeah, so one is from James. He just wants to know, like, in general, how do you plan to handle if and when they change the structure again. I can't imagine that happening very soon. It took them nearly what 6 years before they actually reconfigured the model schema to the current one. So I will assume they're going to sit pretty with this one for at least a few years before that happens again. Like fingers crossed, but I also might have just jinxed it by saying that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is just a risk assessment we all have to do, right? From my own perspective, and from experience, the risk is very, very low. As I said before, this is something which I've actually used for, well, almost 5 years now, right? So it only became open source last year, but it's actually got a very long history. I can only imagine in those 5 years in which Power BI has actually changed quite substantially. I can only remember 2 or 3 instances where I've had some breaking changes. They were all minor. They were literally fixed within 20 minutes or so. So obviously that's no guarantee, right? But I have very heavily invested, just in my own team setup, if you will, in that kind of tooling. So, I mean, personally, I'll have massive interest, obviously, in getting any breaking changes fixed if they were to come.
Perfect. Yep. And like you said, it's one of those where you just gotta, it's the course and nature of building any kind of external tool.
But there's one really important point, if you don't mind, to add here, because if I actually switch to a different sample, so that's also available to everyone, and if I switch to this one instead, that is a very similar setup, but it has one key difference. And the difference here is that, as you can see, those PBIX files are no longer grayed out. They are actually part of my repository now. And this is me trying to actually mitigate exactly that sort of challenge, if you will, where people say, well, if you're extracting and recompiling, that's very risky and we'd rather stay away from it. And I appreciate that. Obviously, this is where a lot of power comes from. However, when it comes to deployments, you have the option of actually using a file as your input as opposed to a folder. And you can completely ignore all the other bells and whistles, if you will, of going into the sources. And you can actually use the deployment functionality with the automation and the configuration and all of that from files directly, in which case there's no risk whatsoever, because this is only using public and documented APIs, right? So the deployment itself is using the Power BI REST API, which is officially supported and documented. And so the one thing I wanted to point out here was, and actually I've got a slide on that as well, was the use of GitLFS. LFS is a Git, say, add-on, if you will. It's short for large file support, and it actually gives us a solution to the fact that PBIX files are big binary blobs. Generally, you don't want to put stuff like that into Git, right? Because Git is meant to be used with text files, and putting binary files in there bloats your repo, and you're not getting any of the benefits from Git in terms of diffs, for instance. So GitLFS allows you to maintain those files as if they were part of your repo. However, your server, in this case GitHub or GitLab or Azure DevOps, will store those files differently. So it will not bloat your repo, and you get the best of both. If I just go back to the slides, because I've made a dedicated point about that. Here, that one. So this is what I would say and give as an option to people who are reluctant about the extraction compilation, but who still want to use the compilation, the deployment functionality, because you can do that as long as you put your PBIX files into source control and you mitigate the problems you would normally get by using GitLFS. And that is a very neat solution. And two of the four examples I've set up, and again, they're all in a public Azure DevOps project, actually do exactly that. Yeah.
That gets a little cheers there. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, like I think our peak concurrent viewers was about 45 today, so we had a good amount of people tuning into this. This was
Awesome.
great. Yeah, I continue to get some questions from a few people in here. I'll just kind of go in order. We talked about the changes there. Less of a question and more just I think a request is if these slides are going to be available later, I can host
absolutely.
them, or I can provide a link to wherever they can download from your site either way. So we'll make sure that these are available, and I'll update the description of this video here in the next few hours to put those into there. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Also follow me on Twitter. I'll definitely tweet out a link to those slides immediately after.
Great. Daryl had a question. Would you consider adding deployment of data flows, if that's even possible? Power BI Desktop M to JSON for data flow deployment.
I'd love to. There's one huge limitation, which I try to sort of get the right people on the Power BI team to listen to, but with no luck so far, which is whilst the REST API allows you to deploy data flows, currently you can only create new data flows with that approach. You cannot update existing data flows, and so that's basically the end of the story. Because if you if you can't update an existing artifact out there, you can't have CI/CD. So yeah, we need to bug Microsoft to remove that pretty arbitrary limit from my point of view. Otherwise, I'd be the first one to sit down and implement that, because I personally am very keen on that functionality as well.
Excellent. Okay, and let's see. I think got one more from James.
Okay.
Is the tool backwards compatible with PBX files that are created before the last change?
Well, it depends on what the last change is. If you refer to the V3 version of PBIX files, which Microsoft, in their great way of naming things, called the enhanced metadata model. I think that was released in November 2019 or 20 or so. If you're referring to that, obviously the origin of the tool goes back to prior to that, right? So the tool was created before that even existed. And I now consider that legacy. I no longer do any more development on legacy files, because V3 has since become the default and the only standard Power BI desktop will actually create. I've never removed any of the legacy code. So basically, if you put a V1 file into the tool, it will be able to extract it, but that's it. None of the other functionality works. Particularly recompile will not work, although thinking about that, with a little bit of manual fiddling in your folder structure, you could make it work. But the thing is, I don't think I need to support that, because Microsoft no longer supports those either. So basically, none of those files should even be in use anymore.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, agreed. And I think, I don't even believe you're allowed to publish them anymore, to my understanding. Like, they will only accept newly transformed ones. I remember getting like a prompt, if you hit the publish button, like, you must first upgrade this to the new metadata format now. I thought, but I could be wrong. I think that was about... Go ahead.
Sorry, on that one, I heard a comment from Caspar recently, who said that even Power BI servers officially only supports up to 1 or 2 versions back on Power BI Desktop. right? So it basically, even
Yeah.
internally, they're saying you always have to upgrade to the latest Power BI desktop release, and we can't guarantee that an old file that you haven't converted locally will actually work.
Exactly. I think that was it for the questions. If there are any last ones, go ahead and drop them in now. Otherwise, we'll start to wrap up. But this has been great. I love it just when people have tons of question and participation, which there's been a
Mm.
lot of, and general chatter of just people's minds being blown on various different things. So it's
I'd
always
love
just
to
cool to
see
see,
this.
yeah, cool
Yeah.
participation. I love it. No, and I learned
Yeah.
quite a bit. It's one more reason for me to to use Visual Studio Code, and
Mm.
again, like this will be certainly what I'm going to point customers to if they're like, hey, can you do a DevOps with this tool? Set it up in GitHub or Azure DevOps, and yeah, you can totally be able to do that to a capacity as once you get that configured and set up and everything. So this is lovely. Thank you.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Any more questions, or do you want to
Yeah, I
leave it?
think we're good. So,
Yeah.
yeah, otherwise, just people saying this tool is amazing and it deserves a lot more visibility. I agree on both of those accounts. And let me switch back over to your. I think you had a little slide for like a wrap up, so I can show that too.
Yes. Yeah. Just a quick wrap up. Here we go. So again, I'm going to share those slides. So in terms of roadmap, um, documentation is well, documentation and GUI, as we've seen. Those are the two big gaps right now.
Yeah.
I'd be, this is open source. Uh, that's my thing. I'm, I'd be very keen for people who felt inclined, wanted to help and contribute, even if it's on documentation. That would be hugely uh, appreciated. Just in terms of what is coming into the deployment, workspace propagation I want to do, where you can basically create workspaces out of a manifest
Okay.
and set the right members and all of that. Data set deployment, just to get the story complete. But again, Tabular Editor is already in that space. But there's a lot of stuff in terms of reports, for instance, swapping connections to different data sets as part of the deployment, transformations, um, and also my latest big feature that is probably going to become reality now is around automated report testing.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's the next one, which is sort of the logical follow-up here, if you will, right? Because testing is part of CI/CD, and we have nothing there right now as far as reports are concerned. Yeah, so just a few notes here. There are some resources. Again, go to pbi.tools or go to GitHub on the PBI-Tools repo. And yeah, follow me, follow the project. If you're in India and you want to work with me at YouGov, looking for a solution architect right now. Yeah, that's all I wanted to share. Um,
Perfect. Yeah. Now what I'll do is I'll take a link to this slide, make sure that's in the description, so people can go
mhm,
down those from wherever you host it. So
mhm, fantastic.
excellent. Yeah. Just people really happy. So I've loved the enthusiasm so far from everyone in the chat. So all of you, thanks
Well, I
for
can't
tuning
see
in
the
today.
chat
Yeah.
right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm super keen to to check it out retrospectively later.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just throw a couple of them up here. Great job with the tool. Great content from Peter. Steven just like, yes, absolutely. This has been amazing. And he's looking forward to some additional sessions that I'm assuming we'll do like a deeper dive into the tutorials and all that. So
Okay,
lots and lots of accolades and cheers around. Again, fantastic tool. So thank you so much for doing this.
awesome, and absolutely thanks for having me here and providing the stage. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then enjoy the rest of your. Actually, I wanted to go to this screen. There we go. Enjoy the rest of your Friday night and little weekend getaway that you'll have to just kind of mentally unwind. So enjoy that. Everybody, thanks for tuning in today as well. And I'll see people next week. Marco and Alberto will be on collectively, which will be an interesting three-way conversation about content development that we'll be talking about next Friday as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Reed. Thanks, everyone who joined. I'll go to the chat and have a look now, see what happened.
Yeah. Perfect. All right.
Okay, bye.
Cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.